As we've seen, constructivists believe that in order to understand an international situation, we need to understand not only the external objective facts on the ground, but also the way that important actors think about those facts, about security, about politics. To illustrate this, let's take a look at the Cold War. We know now that each side in the Cold War profoundly misunderstood the intentions and capabilities of the other. American policymakers tended to take the statements of Soviet premiers at face value, leading Americans to the conclusion that the Soviet Union intended destruction of all capitalist countries. Many Americans, including John F. Kennedy, worried that the United States was falling far behind the Soviet Union in the number of missiles available. In retrospect, we know that the U.S. had significantly more firepower. With information that has become available since the breakup of the Soviet Union, it no longer appears that the Soviet Union was poised for world domination. The USSR was actually much weaker than it appeared to be. By the mid-60s, their economy was in a shambles and getting worse. In fact, it now appears that going back at least to 1945, Soviet leaders were primarily interested in the security and power of their own nation, not so much with spreading the communist ideology. Internal documents released after show that Stalin was actually less interested in ensuring that Mao's Red Army defeated the KMT, which would lead a huge country to become communist, than he was in hanging on to Russian possessions in Manchuria. None of this is to argue for any particular theory of the correctness of U.S. policy during the Cold War, or for that matter of Soviet policy, but merely to illustrate the constructivist focus on the difference between reality and knowledge. Not only do decision makers work with imperfect knowledge, but even that knowledge that they had was filtered through the lens of domestic ideology, domestic politics. By its very nature, constructivism avoids simple analyses. But, to put it briefly, American post-war politics was dominated by anti-communism. Led, but not limited to, Senator Joe McCarthy, anyone suspected of insufficient anti-communism was liable to lose their position. As public figures competed with each other to take the hardest anti-communist position, politicians and policymakers became very reluctant to express any doubts about Cold War anti-communist orthodoxy. Private statements suggest that both Kennedy and Johnson questioned the Vietnam War, but felt that political considerations made it impossible to back down. Anti-communism also combined with homophobia and rather bizarre gender dynamics to further influence American policy. An incident just as important as McCarthyism, but less well known, saw suspected gay men and women drummed out of government. We'll discuss how gender influences international relations more in the next unit.